was shocked at everything, you know what I'm saying? But I wasn't.
Welcome to The Undercurrent, your source for grassroots news. I'm Lauren Windsor. Joining me today are Dick Price and Sharon Kyle, the publishers of the LA Progressive, activist Lauren Steiner, and Ian Masters, the host of the background briefing on KPFK, Pacifica Radio, and ianmasters.com. Dick and Sharon recently helped organize the LA Media Reform Summit to tackle the issue of the Koch brothers buying the LA Times, which is what we will be discussing today. Activist Lauren Steiner organized a protest in Beverly Hills in the neighborhood of Bruce Karsh, who is the chairman of the board of the Tribune, and Ian Masters was at the LA Media Reform Summit. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
So before we get started, to steal your tagline, we'll do some background briefing on the Koch brothers. So the Koch brothers are the billionaire brothers behind Koch Industries, an energy and manufacturing products conglomerate. Some of the products that they manufacture are Dixie cups, Brawny paper towels, Lycra and Stainmaster carpets. Politically, they are staunchly libertarian. Their father was a founding member of the John Birch Society. In 1977, they founded the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian public policy think tank. In 1980, David ran on the libertarian ticket for vice president. I didn't know that until I started prepping for today. And more recently, they founded Americans for Prosperity, which is the real organization that's behind the Tea Party movement. In the 2012 elections, Koch-related organizations spent about $400 million. So let's get to the LA Times, the reason that we're here today. So the Koch brothers have never owned a media property, but yet there's a lot of blowback and criticism of their attempt to buy the LA Times and the Chicago Tribune. So why is it that the Koch brothers are such a bad choice?
I can say, whatever group of individuals or corporation or pair of brothers buy the LA Times, they're going to be vastly wealthy. Most likely they're going to be rock-ribbed Republicans, certainly not liberal lions. And the concern with the Koch brothers and the LA Times is their motivation in buying the Times. They're not just investing this to turn a buck. Their Koch Industries makes $150 billion a year. They together have $64 billion in the bank. They hardly need a little newspaper in a town they never visit to make more money. But they are buying it explicitly to influence public discourse in Los Angeles and across the country. By buying, I think it's the fourth largest paper in the country, they're going to have a great platform, and their voice will not just be confined to the editorial page or the op-ed pages, but the editorial, the news pages as well.
And I think it's important to take a look at their history. So what they've demonstrated in the past is that they're very interested in advancing their own agenda at the expense of the people. So the public interest seems to be not an interest of theirs. And so when people say that they're concerned about the concentration of media ownership in certain hands, particularly in the Koch brother hands, what we as activists are trying to push back against is the detrimental effects that has on the public interest.
I think it should also be pointed out that they are the second largest they're the second largest company in the world, in the country, the first largest privately held company, and they have used their wealth to not only advance their business interests, but also their political interests, which often coincide. In addition to those consumer products you mentioned, they are also operators of oil and gas refineries. They will have the biggest amount to gain if the Keystone XL pipeline is approved, because right now they're getting their dirty oil from Venezuela. If they can get it from the Harper government, they will make $33 more a barrel, which will net them $2 billion in profit a year. When David Sasson from Inside Climate News, who's an award-winning, he won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the lax oversight of the pipeline industry in the United States, when he wrote of the Koch connection to the Keystone XL pipeline, the Koch brothers used their influence to try to pressure Reuters from not carrying the Inside Climate News anymore.
Well, there is indeed a lot of overlap between their interests. They've been champions of deregulation and small government, so I agree with you on that. But is it enough that their ideology is, limited government, that's the reason why they can't buy the paper?
Well, are they buying the paper? It's not entirely clear. Maybe they're buying the Tribune, which is the umbrella company, other properties, other media properties as well. But the larger issue is that most of these big newspapers are monopolies. The LA Times is a monopoly here in Los Angeles and in Southern California. And this has led to a kind of journalism of the center. Most of the other civilized countries, the social democracies, Europe, etc., they have full spectrum politics in their newspapers, starting from the far left to the far right. We have a journalism that's been created because of these media monopolies of centrism, because they do this balance, pro and con. They don't want to offend half their readers who are Democrats and the other half who are Republicans. So this has led to this bland form of journalism that we have. And also it's led, as our other guests have suggested, to this idea that these people can control the ideology. The Daily Oklahoman, for example, has turned Oklahoma into a Republican state. But my feeling is that if the Kochs buy the LA Times, they will devalue it so radically because of their radical politics that it may actually end up breaking the monopoly and giving voice to the full spectrum of political ideas that we sorely need in our so-called democracy.
So would you rather see the paper fold if it were an option of the Koch brothers or folding?
I would say I see what Ian's talking about happening now, no matter what happens with this sale. I mean, there's half as many subscribers to the LA Times as there were 10 years ago. They've laid off a third of their staff. And in their place are arising small media, a lot of digital online media that is giving that full spectrum of views that the city wasn't enjoying and couldn't enjoy for reasons of mechanics. It was very hard to even have a small local paper to put it together. And now it's easy as pie to put up a digital page. And I see that taking a larger and larger role, and I agree with Ian too. If the Koch brothers do get it, people like on this panel will not be reading the Times at all if they're reading it much now, and they'll be looking harder at these alternative media.
And working in the digital space, running a website, doing a web show, I get that. But there is something to be said for having an investigative bureau, because as much as I want to say that I can be an investigative journalist, I don't have the resources that the LA Times has. So there is something that will be lost in the process, and are we willing to pay that price? Well,
listen, the option, the other alternatives, if the Koch brothers get it, you're going to get more of that junk science that says global warming is a hoax. They also fund the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation, which are right-wing think tanks. And when they're able to say, scientists from the Cato Institute or researchers from the Heritage Foundation say, they are able to have an influence on the public discourse. For instance, they are the #1 funders of climate change denial, more so than ExxonMobil, the American Petroleum Institute, and all the other donors combined. In the 10 years since they've been doing this, the number of people in our country that thinks global warming is real and that it is human-caused has decreased. So even if half of the people cancel their subscription to the LA Times, they're still going to be able to now start saying, the LA Times showed this, and the LA Times said that. So they're not buying this for an investment, as these guys said. They don't need the LA Times to make money. They need the LA Times to amplify their voice.
Right, so they need the LA Times to shape public opinion so that they can have room to do what it is that they want to do to further their own agenda.
Greater credibility.
Greater credibility, and also masking what's really happening. Right. Now,
but what you were saying though about the need for investigative journalism, and that these big, well-funded newspapers used to do it, they do it less and less, as is the case with the network news. That's point's well taken, because as a journalist, I need the LA Times, and particularly the New York Times, just to get an idea of what's happening, because they have bureaus around the world. Nothing is as good as the BBC, which is available online, of course, but still, they are an important resource. And it's worth pointing out that the reason they're in the demise they are, as Dick said, fewer people listen, about half the readership now, right, is because of this vulture capitalist who took over. And the paradox of American media is that you either have these well-intentioned, civic-minded oligarchs that own papers, like the Salzburgers in New York and the Chandlers.
Warren Buffett.
And all you have, these right-wing demagogues like the Kochs. So, there's no way that you can mediate and regulate, and that's the problem with American media. There isn't a BBC that sets a journalistic standard. There is no alternative except the free market and ultimately the opinions of the plutocrats who own these newspapers, whether they're on the right or on the left.
And so I would say, what you just talked about, that's why I hope that the LA Times survives in some fashion. Because alternative media, as energetic as it is and as wonderful as it's going to be, isn't yet to the point where it can put a couple of people in City Hall to cover every city council meeting, to have a couple of people covering the police department, to really uncover the scandal that may be brewing. And if we lose that resource, our democracy is in more trouble than it already is. And it's in plenty of trouble when 25% of the people are voting in our mayor's race.
But perhaps we've already lost that resource. Nobody here, right? Nobody here can forecast the future. But maybe it is best that the Koch brothers do what they're going to do. We don't know what the outcome will be, and as it stands right now, there are many voices who aren't being heard, even with today's structure of the LA Times. There's always been an issue with diversity of opinion and diversity of perspective, particularly ethnic diversity, and there are a myriad of groups who just can't have an opportunity to bring their opinion to the table.
Well, I would say that there is an alternative, and that alternative is the group that is being formed by Eli Broad and Austin Butner. They plan to run the paper as a nonprofit. They plan to buy, first of all, the Tribune Company itself is not for sale. They want to spin off the unprofitable papers and keep the profitable TV stations. So what they're trying to sell right now is the 8 newspapers. And even though Eli Broad and Austin Butner only want to run the Times, they are raising enough money. They are actually finding buyers in the other markets, Baltimore, Chicago, Miami, so they're really making a concerted effort to put the money together to be competitive with the Koch brothers to get this purchase. Now, even though Eli Broad is a conservative Democrat and Austin Butner is a moderate Republican, and so together they make the center. And even though Eli Broad is one of the main funders behind the charter school movement, which I personally think is insidious in the way that it's taking over public education and trying to privatize a public good, I still think that they would be a darn sight better than the Koch brothers. Because the Koch brothers, not only do they want to abolish government regulation, as you said, he's a libertarian. They want to abolish government altogether. They want to abolish minimum wage. They want to abolish Social Security. They want to abolish unions. They're really evil people.
Well, I would stay away from making that characterization. Not knowing them personally, I think that's a hard statement to make. They get vilified, by liberals, and I think they're probably, sentient human beings that have reasons for their politics. All politics are personal. Their father, started his pipeline company over in communist Russia. And
founded the John Birch Society.
Exactly. So I think that your experiences shape you, and they they've led a lot of philanthropic efforts. George Soros is the boogeyman of the right for being the leftist.
He hasn't
conspiracy. No, but hold on. So researching on the Kochs, I found that a couple of surprising things. They did an immigration debate. They sponsored it through the Charles Koch Foundation. And this wasn't to, spur on anti-immigration discussion. This was to move the discussion forward to have some immigration reform. They actually support, but socially, they're libertarians.
Listen,
they support liberalizing a lot of social realm laws that, liberals would like to see repealed, legalizing marijuana.
The good side of Rand Paul, is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Legalizing marijuana, legalizing same-sex marriage. They've come out in support of this.
But you don't get the good side with the bad. You get it all. And the bad, I think, dominates in these cases.
But everyone is multifaceted, and I don't think that anyone is 100% pure, like any of these industrialists, whether they be right or left.
Right,
and
but
so
most
would you have,
industrialists-
but would you have the same feeling if Warren Buffett bought these papers? Would you have the same objections when Warren Buffett spent $142 million to buy 63 newspapers last year? There was no media outrage. There was
But the
no
difference is-
activist outrage. Would
Could
you
I
have the
comment on
same
that?
feeling?
So as I understand it, Buffett bought a bunch of papers in small and medium-sized cities because his research showed that those papers would survive. They would thrive. They would become the paper of record in a small town.
He's a value investor.
He bought them as an investment. There isn't any sense that Warren Buffett, who is a moderate Democrat, as Lauren points out, what in my youth we would have called a Rockefeller Republican, but there isn't any evidence that he bought those to shape the opinion in those towns.
Right.
He bought them to turn a buck. The Koch brothers are explicitly thinking about investing in this media to change the conversation.
But they've stated that?
Furthermore,
that's ought to be obvious.
It was in Aspen. They had a conference in Aspen in 2010 where they declared that they had a three-pronged strategy. One was to influence the public through education. The other was to get new voters, which they're doing through their various dark money organizations. And the other was to gain control of the media. So, in fact, they're trying to influence after 2012 when they weren't as successful in defeating Barack Obama and other Democrats as they had, as they were in the election of 2010. They decided they needed to adopt Obama's strategy and go after Hispanics, minorities, and youth. So the Tribune Company owns Hoy, which is the second largest Spanish language daily. So that's another reason they're going after it. And two quick responses to what you said about the immigration. They are in favor of immigration reform, just like George Bush was, because they would like to see low-cost workers for their industries. And as far as the other point you made about philanthropy, yes, David Koch he's endowed a lot of cancer hospitals because he's a prostate cancer survivor, but his factories also cause cancer.
Well, he also donated $100 million to Lincoln Center for the renovation.
Of course, he's greenwashing himself.
He went to MIT, and they've been huge donors to MIT.
But he's causing
that's
cancer.
Money talks now. That's what it's all about. Money talks.
I'm not about plutocracy. Like,
we're having a conversation about whether or not somebody's going to buy a newspaper. They have the money to buy it. There's nothing any of us can do. We can complain, but I think the broader issues in the media are, and it's been brought up here, is whether businessmen who buy newspapers like Buffett basically do it for profit. Now, if there were no regulations, and the FCC hardly regulates, the people who own the media, in television they'd run wall-to-wall commercials because that's revenue. Programs are an expense. So they hate programs, they love advertising. The same with the newspapers. It would be all advertising. So to some extent they're regulated by some altruism that they have to provide information. When you have an ideologue like the Kochs, it's obviously worse than a businessman. But at the end of the day, I don't know how you regulate altruism, and particularly when we're talking about the white knight being Eli Browd, this over egotistical guy that wants to put his name on every edifice that's ever been built. What kind of a newspaper will we end up with there? So I don't know how you choose your poison. I really don't.
So I think that the broader issue, and really I think probably
the broader issue?
Right, the broader issue for me is that whether it's Warren Buffett or Koch or whether it's a benevolent oligarch or that is what we should be trying to promote, is greater control of the public interest by the public, which is what they have in other countries, and that point has already been made at this table. So I'm actually not interested in arguing whether Koch is an evil guy or a good guy. I don't want any guy or any woman I want for us to not have concentrated ownership of something that is so important as the media. That establishes the foundation of this democracy. One of the reasons that the American public is so disengaged is because they don't have meaningful ways of gleaning information. Half the people don't even know how to vote. We had an election just last week where about 19% turned out to the, in the city of Los Angeles, a municipal election, 19% turnout.
Well, that has a lot to do with the fact that people are apathetic and cynical, and they recognize that, you know, their vote doesn't count, their voice doesn't count, that big money controls everything. And that's why you and Lauren and others are working so hard to get big money out of politics.
That's right, but some of thank you so much. But one of the problems is their perception that what they do doesn't count. For example, the demonstration yesterday for Monsanto. How many people? 2 million?
2 million
Did
people.
the media cover it?
No.
The people who weren't there, who didn't witness the 2 million, if they are relying on media to tell them whether or not we're making a difference, they're going to think that we're not.
But
You know who covered it? RT, Russia Television.
Oh,
They
yeah,
were there.
There's great credibility there, right?
Well,
Putin's on TV.
I
Give us a break.
know, but they also covered the Occupy movement.
That's right.
And,
well, of
and
course it shows
I know-
America at its worst.
I know the reason.
But
All I'm saying is
what,
you
what
can
Sharon
see.
was talking about with this switch from a few people owning all the media outlets, which has been our history, to this broad ownership by lots of voices. That's what's so exciting about being alternative media now. It's not clear that we'll succeed. It's not clear that we'll be able to have reporters in City Hall, like I said, but it is clear that we're moving in that direction. And I wanted to make the point, I worked in magazine publishing for many years, not at this lofty level, but we made really good magazines, and we pumped up the editorial, and we pumped up the design, and the readers ran online. And the way the money works is the magazines got smaller and smaller, and just like the newspapers, we had to do more and more with less and less. Right. So the poor LA Times reporters now, they got to run out to stories with cameras and recorders. They got to be 4 or 5 different kinds of people. And so what's going to happen in years to come is whoever buys the LA Times, in 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, it will have to be principally a digital media.
My state of mind, have I been hypnotized to believe in lies with the monologue, questioning God like Habakkuk, cause the odds keep stacking up. Where is the illumination for the human nation?